Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Science of the Times podcast. How are you, Syma?
I'm doing very well, thanks. A bit cold, but all good. How are you, Tim?
Yeah, no, I'm good. Relaxed after the Christmas break and sort of ready to throw myself into a not particularly onerous term, I hope.
Excellent.
You've been at like a workshop all day, a bacteria, bringing
Yeah,
everyone who works on bacteria or many people who work on bacteria in Oxford together.
yeah, absolutely. And we've had a great speaker, a guest speaker from Harvard, who's been with us all day and staying over this evening. And so, yeah, it's been really good, actually. Lots of different aspects of bacteria being studied here.
We should do some more episodes on bacteria actually, because I
Sure,
mean microbes are such fascinating organisms.
they
So
really
that would
are.
be good.
Well, we're
But
far removed from bacteria today, though, right? With our guest.
we are, in fact, we're kind of moving a bit into the social science. So I think we should ask our guest a little bit about that. He's called Pepper Culpepper, fantastic name, and he has written a book with a guy called Takeo Lee. It's coming out quite soon, and it's called Billionaire Backlash. It's all about his analyses of corporate scandals and how they might help save democracy. So, I mean, you're a big fan of Elon Musk, aren't you, Syma?
Yeah, absolutely. He's one of my best mates.
So, in this book, he kind of does these analyses of a number of corporate scandals, and a lot of them are around companies that get really big, incredibly powerful, and then screw things up. And by breaking rules, by thinking they're above the law, that sort of stuff. And I think we'll have a fascinating conversation with him. And we should ask him about how he goes about collecting the data and kind of analyzing these sorts of
Yes.
things. But I think, we'll hear about Volkswagen, probably the American meat market from the 1800s. The East India Company, Samsung, all of those sorts of things. So it's a great book, a little bit different from usual, but I think our listeners will enjoy it.
Yeah, I think so too. Shall we get him on?
Let's do that.
Well, Pepper, welcome to Science of the Times. Yeah, would you like to introduce yourself for our listeners?
Thanks, Syma, and thank you, Tim. I'm Pepper Culpepper. I'm a professor at the Blavatsky School of Government at Oxford, and with my colleague Taegu Lee, with whom I've been working on this project for many years, a decade or more. I've written a book called Billionaire Backlash, which Tim is kindly holding up, the age of corporate scandal and how it could save democracy. And it's basically an argument about in a partisan, polarized age, how corporate scandals against very big corporations seem to be one of the few things that speak across the divides and bring people together in favor of what we might call common sense regulation. There is a common sense regulation, and one of the things we can talk about is how we discover public opinion and what it actually is on that.
So I mean, as an example, everyone's kind of a bit angry with X at the moment for their AI thing, Grok. Is that sort of potentially a beginning of a corporate scandal?
It is. You've anticipated, Tim, some of the stuff we'll talk about. The thing about Grok is that its owner, Elon Musk, has injected himself very heavily into politics, not just in the United States, but especially in the United States. And so Elon Musk is not without partisanship in the sense that most people don't look at Elon Musk and say, wow, he's just a crazy billionaire. They say he's a billionaire who's associated himself very much with the political right. And so those on the political right are a little more sympathetic to X and Grok than people on the left. So even though you get large portions of the population, certainly in the United States, that are very worried about AI and what's going to happen with AI, and many people around the world are uncomfortable right at the moment that we're taping this with the abilities of Grok to undress underage people. You have people who will nevertheless, for political reasons, and I want to say a little more about those political reasons, who might be more supportive of Musk than if Musk didn't have political valence, in the sense we're an apolitical figure. And so we find that scandals that have political valence are a little bit harder to catch on, though I have to say that Grok, Musk, and X are doing their damnedest to kind of break through that wall.
So I guess before we get into that, though, most of our guests are scientists. You're a social scientist. Obviously, social science is a type of science. But each scandal, and it kind of comes across in your book, each scandal is a little bit different. So how do you draw? Tell us about how you go about conducting the research, and you sort of have historical narratives around many of the scandals in your book, how they unfolded and what have you. How do you go about sort of analyzing those each of those scandals and drawing together a coherent conclusion as you've done about how these things play out and how they can influence public views on large businesses, but also on how democracy should work and good government should function?
Well, I mean, thank you for the open question. Many hard scientists are have a view of social science that's somewhat more skeptical. That goes all the way to it's throwing feces at the wall sort of things.
That's why I asked it rather than Syma.
But I think we can take it all the way to we're all trying to do the same thing, and that we're trying to uncover what is the truth, and we're trying to take hypotheses to data that can shed light on that. And so our truth is a lot about public opinion and what the public thinks. And so we're very interested in trying to understand where people stand. So when we talk about public opinion, for example, there's a chapter about financial regulation. So we're measuring what opinions are about financial regulation in a way that is pretty systematic in terms of, if you just ask individual questions of the sort that one asks in the kind of polls that you read in newspapers, they move around a lot. But we ask scales, and scales tend to hang together much more regularly, and we use a technique called factor analysis to draw out what, if you like, is the underlying latent variable, which may or may not be familiar to you all as a way to think about opinion. And so then we measure, with those measures of, say, financial regulation or technological regulation or positions on climate change, we then are able to look at what happens when, in a survey context, we randomize the assignment between, and here you're moving into an experimental context that will be very familiar to all of your scientific listeners, your exposure to either what we call the scandal treatment, where they read about, say, for example, Goldman Sachs and the way that Goldman Sachs behaved in the wake of the financial crisis and how it was covered in the U.S. Congress, or they'll read about Exxon and the Exxon news scandal and how Exxon was, aware of, had very good models of climate change from the 1970s, but basically tried to systematically push the narrative that, in fact, science is very uncertain, so we shouldn't regulate in this area. So that's the scandal treatment, if you like. It mimics what a news article would be without any particular name of a publication, so that people don't get distracted by that. And then they would get a control group, and the control group is very important for us because we're not interested in what the effects that business coverage, which bores some people in the first place, has on people. So we take a sort of neutral company. For example, Office Depot in the United States is our control group, and we write a very boring article about their business strategy. It's not boring to business analysts, but it's boring to most readers. And so it's designed to evoke images of business, but not any particular strong valence issues. And that's our control to which we compare scandal effects.
Let's hope they don't have a big scandal then. Sorry, Simon.
You laugh. Sorry, just to say on that, we did a set of surveys in 2020 and then again in 2023, and one of our control companies in Germany did have a scandal in between, so we had to switch companies. Yeah.
Amazing. So, Pepper, when you you have the people that you get opinions from, and you sort of, how far out of your way do you go to sort of ensure a sort of an even demographic, if that makes sense?
Oh, well, that's pretty fundamental to what we're doing. And so so we employed YouGov, which is a pretty well-known survey firm and relatively reputable. I would say highly reputable, actually. And so we're trying to get a representative sample based on a number of demographic characteristics, like gender, like income, like education, like vote share, so that the group we have mimics the population in these countries. And then we have relatively large samples so that we're pretty sure that we're not far off of what the population actually thinks.
And so these scandals, I kind of think what I was really interested in your book is, that they're not a new phenomenon. So corporate scandals have been for big companies have been around for some time. It's not just I kind of always thought that things like Meta and things like Amazon, in the internet age, they've just grown to be these massive companies. But there have been very large and very influential and very powerful companies in the past. And in fact, you start the book actually with or one of the earlier examples of a corporate scandal is around meat processing in the US. Is that I wonder if you'd like to say a little bit more about that.
Thank you for the opening, Tim. So we're going to venture into history here, so I hope the scientific listeners won't feel uncomfortable. But so in terms of positioning the book, we try to say many people think we're in an age that's very close to the 1930s where parties are radicalizing and democracy seems under threat. We agree that democracy is under threat, but we think the better analogy for where we stand is the 1900s, especially the 1900s in the United States, where in the United States, as a result of the technological revolution, the Industrial Revolution, you'd had, which is, of course, just another version of what we're experiencing now with first the internet and now AI. You had these massive companies that grew up. They were phenomenally successful. They made lives a lot better. They made living standards a lot better. But they also began to exert huge control over politics. And there was, if you like, an ambient concern about these in the American public. And so scandals provide a way for that ambient concern to get released. They're the earthquake that's happening while there's sort of a plate tectonics going on underneath. And the plate tectonics are these very big companies are suddenly taking a role that they didn't have before, and democratic people are being democratically disempowered, and they don't like it, and political parties don't like it either. And so the scandal that Tim mentioned was the publication of The Jungle by Upton Sinclair in 1906, which was in fact a novel. It was not about what actually happened, but he was an investigative reporter, and he went in and he sort of worked among the stockyards, which is of course the place where they slaughter animals, and he reported the state of the stockyards and the way that rats had been poisoned and then ground up into your sausage, and how these big carcasses were dragged across the floor where the workers had spit their tubercular phlegm. And the book caught fire in the United States. It was rejected by several publishers, but when it was published, it immediately sold out because it spoke to something that Americans were really worried about, which is that they were getting this crap beef and crap meat, and that it wasn't safe for them. And so you immediately get the establishment of what becomes the Food and Drug Administration. And so that sort of beginning of the regulatory state in the United States, we think is very suggestive of the era we may be in now. But no scandals are not new. But they're especially important at a time when you get a society out of whack in terms of the role of big companies.
Well, and one thing that Upton Sinclair, was that his name?
Yes.
One of the things, he was left wing, you point out in the book, and he was a socialist. So he was hoping to sort of empower socialists, but it led to this regulation that you talk about. And he had a great line about sort of trying to punch them in the chest, but missed and got them in the stomach.
I aimed for the heart and I hit them in the stomach, is what he said.
Yeah, it's a great line. It made me, I was amused. Syma.
Yeah, I think so. When Tim suggested you as a guest in the book, I think what I found interesting was in the title was the focus on billionaires in particular. I wondered if you can tell us this sort of the companies, and is that a big distinction from just rich people? Like, does the billionaire distinction tell us something that, sort of, does it give us something that we don't get just from a rich elite, if that makes sense?
So we've done, a lot of work on attitudes towards actual billionaires, and we find that the billionaires. So we know in politics that stories about structural phenomena are a little more boring than stories that are told episodically, and episodically means in terms of an individual person. Mm-hmm. The billionaires are the episodic stories of our age, right? They explain or they represent these massive changes which have concentrated a lot of income and wealth in a very few hands. And so you have powerful companies, but already a powerful company is kind of, it's hard to understand, exactly what's going on with Meta. It's hard to understand what's going on with, say a crypto company or FTX, but it's very easy to understand what's going on with Sam Bankman-Fried or with Mark Zuckerberg, right? So that catches attention. People focus on that. And we find that there's, if you like, and I'll kind of veer into something that I hope we can talk more about, which is a difference between what we call a kind of good populism and bad populism. And this is implicit in the book because it's not just about corporate scandals. It's about corporate scandals have to, for them to have effect, there has to be sort of resentment out there. And we find a lot of resentment towards billionaires that's concentrated in what we call a good populism. And it's not good because, for example, many listeners will be on the left and they will say, oh, well, it's good because it'll get these right-wingers out. It's not. It's about good populism is a sort of resentment of economic unfairness that's embodied in our current system, which is shared across the left and the right. And it goes alongside of what we call bad populism, which is concern about political unfairness, which is represented by items on you can't trust the mainstream media. It doesn't matter which parties get elected. There are just a few people who are in power. All of these things hang together very closely in public opinion. And those things, what we call that political unfairness dimension, also hangs very closely with anti-immigrant, anti-minority, and anti-Semitism views. So those things all hang together on one side. Good populism is actually associated with warmer feelings towards minorities and immigrants, and very hostile feelings towards billionaires. So we actually find that there's a big trend out there, which it is waiting to be captured by parties that want to try to seize it in terms of bringing in some sort of common sense regulation of these billionaires. It exists on the left. It's highly influential on the left, but it also exists on the right.
So your last chapter actually is called Good Populism, if I remember rightly in the book.
That's right.
And so, but as you point out, so some, and maybe I've kind of misunderstood this bit, but so some of our richest people on the planet at the moment, as you mentioned about Elon Musk, which we talked about earlier, is very right wing. He's come down on the right wing side. Those are probably his politics. I have no doubt about that. But does that, when you end up with a billionaire getting involved in politics on one side, does that sort of make the good populism hard because he's bringing people from the right to his side to become supportive of him? Because so you haven't got that broad church across the political spectrum of people who are opposed to the billionaires or the unfurling scandals.
Well, so Tim, people are complicated. They hold contradictory views. And so
I don't. What are you talking about?
So if a way to think about this kind of thinking in politics is tribalism, right? People have a kind of tribal view that's associated with the right or the left, or in the United Kingdom for a long time, it was, with Brexit or Remain. And so, or Leave or Remain. And so these views, they are one strand that goes on alongside in the same person's mind often, a feeling that the billionaires are really out of control. So if you take, for example, Steve Bannon, or who is a big thinker on the right in the United States, or you take J.D. Vance, the current vice president of the United States, these guys are very anti-big corporation, very anti-big tech in a lot of their discussions, even though J.D. Vance is basically bankrolled by Peter Thiel, who's a famous right-wing ideologue and billionaire. And so you get these things going together. And Bannon has been pushing to get the tech bros out of the administration because he realizes that a lot of the electoral force of what we call MAGA in the United States is, in fact, anti-big company and especially anti-big tech. And so, the question is, what comes out when you have these scandals, and what are the moments that people seize on where you get these real focusing events where they stop looking at Musk as an actor associated with the Trump administration and start looking at Musk as someone who has unbelievable power over a lot of lives, including our informational sphere. And, people come together to say, maybe there's something we need to do about this.
So, sorry, Syma, you're about to say
No, go ahead, Tim.
So, I kind of want to come a little bit round via a couple of examples to sort of how these scandals can kind of help save democracy, because there's a lot of people, and I think you're right, a lot of our listeners are on the left. They're worried about the state of a democracy and what it looks like going forwards. But there, you have one or two examples. I'm thinking of the Samsung example in particular, where a corporate scandal actually led to, the president of Korea stepping down or being forced out. And that's relatively unusual, though, is it? That you get to that point where you end up with a change of a powerful political figure who's managed to somehow get embroiled in a large corporate scandal.
Yeah, and so the thing about the Samsung scandal, which maybe I'll give a little context for listeners. The reason we talk about Korea, because of course South Korea back in 1960 was a backwater. It was one of the least developed countries in the world. It was very poor. And then it went through a crash course in industrialization, led by a bunch of big conglomerates called chaebol. And Samsung was the biggest among these, or has become the biggest among these. And so these companies helped build modern Korea, and they were very closely associated with the autocratic leaders of Korea for a long time. And so they've been wrapped up with it, but there also is a lot of national pride about these companies. And so what happened with the fall of that administration that was tied up with these chaebol, these conglomerates, is that they were increasingly involved in corruption scandals. And so there was, if you like, a kind of simmering opinion in Korea about this kind of thing shouldn't be going on, but it seems like there's nothing we can do about it. And then there was a scandal where the president is shown to have an advisor, sort of a Rasputin figure, who has complete control over her. And part of the thing she's doing is getting a big donation from Samsung, such that she can wield influence over the president. And that wraps the conglomerates right into a sort of bribery scandal around the president, and people march out on the street in what's called these candlelight protests, and eventually it topples the president. The president is impeached. And so Korea is a very successful example of a society that kind of mobilizes around scandal issues and demands political change. But of course, there were lots of scandals that didn't take off. It just happened to be that it came at the right moment where there was this pressure that had built up. There was dissatisfaction, and then, of course, this very juicy scandal broke, and it involves the sort of puppy and a mistreatment of a puppy, if you'll remember from the book. So it has lots of colorful elements that catch people's eyes, but then it brought people out into the street to protest in a big way. But as you say, that is rare. That is not what scandals often look like. What scandals often look like is people get really concerned about this, and activists come out, and they take advantage of that latent opinion, and they sort of try to push through change. So that's much more the modal case where you get reform, where some really crazy person says, this is something I'm going to do something about, and we need to change it. And so Max Schrems, for example, the Austrian, Alistair McTaggart in California, these are much more your figures who make regulatory change in the wake of a scandal.
So Pepper, are there, I mean, this could be a now thing or it could be a historical thing. Are there some institutions that are sort of more susceptible to this kind of influence from the very rich or billionaires, or and others that are that are more resilient, or is it an across the board kind of thing?
So when you say institutions, are you talking about some countries have institutions that are better at resisting this sort of influence of the wealthy? So do you have something in mind, I wonder?
I generally don't. As a sort of scientist, I'm thinking, do patterns emerge? Are there some ways of setting up a country, or, for example, some things that make it more resilient or make it more susceptible?
Could the Samsung, let me put it another way, could something similar to Samsung have played out in China?
Okay. So I think this is a really good question, and we start out the book with a story about the difference between two milk scandals, one in China that actually wound up killing babies because what was happening in China, in the run up to the 2008 Olympic Games, a bunch of stories were suppressed about babies getting ill from consuming this infant formula, and it turns out that a company was lacing this formula with a product called melamine, which is basically involved in the production of plastics. And what it does, it apparently increases protein content in the milk. And when you measure milk for protein content, you measure nitrogen. And so melamine brings a lot of nitrogen. And so they would use that as a cheap way to bump up the protein content of the milk. So it successfully passed muster, but also melamine is very bad for kidneys. And so some babies wound up dying and many wound up getting ill as a result of this sort of melamine scandal. So the Chinese government suppressed it for a while and then allowed it to come out. And when it came out, they then had some scapegoats who they actually executed, two people associated with the company. But they didn't allow any discredit to come to government. They didn't allow an attempt to mobilize around it, as often happens in democracies, when people are challenging the government, saying, this is happening on your watch. It's a mistake of our regulatory system. And so now the Chinese, they are widely distrustful of their food production system because of the role of profit in sort of cutting corners and not just in milk. But so Lactalis, a French company, had a scandal that was in many ways less bad, but led to 35 parliamentary hearings, led to people being put on trial. And the French, they still trust their food. In fact, they'll tell you their food is a lot better than the food we have here. And certainly it's just as safe, and certainly maybe safer than places where you don't have as much food regulation regularly being tested. And so that's kind of a democratic advantage for systems where a liberal democratic advantage, I say. It's not just a democracy, but you've got to have an allowance for people to go out and protest and be pains to themselves so that change can actually happen.
So can you give us an example then, a little bit more about how the backlash against these corporate scandals, and whether it's tied to individuals or the companies, as you've been talking about, how it can actually help democracy? Is it just through putting better governance in place so that these large organizations, these large companies can't continue to behave outside of the law, or in a way that's damaging to individuals or groups of individuals, or is there something more to it than that?
Okay, I was warned before coming on that academics sometimes have long answers, so you'll interrupt me if I'm one of those just now. But it's a great question, and it goes to the core of what we talk about in our diagnosis. Essentially, democracy has several problems. And when I say democracy, I mean democracy in many of the rich countries, not just in any one country, not just in the UK, in the UK, in the US, in France, and Germany, Australia, Switzerland. These are the countries where we've done surveys. Korea. What's happening is you have these companies getting very big, and at the same time, less and less ability to control their influence in politics. And that's a widely sensed problem on both the left and the right. One area where they're particularly strong, and this is, of course, a product of the change of the internet age, is in the informational sphere. So the informational sphere has got distorted such that it used to be that we were all talking the same language. We all had a similar story that we were telling each other about what's going on. Now, Syma and I may have different political beliefs, but we were arguing about facts, about what, do we want a government that will have higher taxes or lower taxes, more regulation or less regulation? And with the control that these big companies have over the informational sphere, and with the way that people have disappeared down their little rabbit holes, we don't get as many of these common conversations. What corporate scandals do, we find, is they recreate these common conversations, and they suggest a way that common conversations can be recreated, and they result in a kind of common sense upwelling of people demanding accountability from their politicians. Because most people, most of the time, don't care about politics. They're thinking about other things. I'm a political scientist. I spend all my time thinking about politics. But that makes me exceedingly unusual, as my kids don't hesitate to tell me over the dinner table. So it's about bringing people into politics and saying something has to happen, and then it's about activists responding to that demand. So that's why the claim about being good for democracy is, if you like, two-pronged. In the one sense, our diagnosis, both about the role of companies and the role of the informational sphere, is very much tied up to how we can correct this and make democracies work. And then on the other hand, as I was talking about in the answer earlier to Syma, a lot of the feelings about economic unfairness are actually associated there. So they're associated with feelings that are good for solidarity. The only kind of solidarity that gets broken down when you play on what we call the sentiment of good populism is solidarity with billionaires. And we think that's not much of a loss. We think that when you play up differences with minorities, with religious groups, with immigrants in general, I say this as an immigrant in this country myself, that's much more corrosive of politics, because democratic politics is fundamentally about pluralism. We accept difference. And so if we identify out groups not just as a couple of billionaires who are, have a lot of control over our lives, but as all of these groups that we blame for these problems, that's much more corrosive of democracy. And I think the last 10 years in this country, we've very much seen that. And you see the arguments in the UK are pretty much about an agenda set by reform and the radical right, that is, around immigration. And it's not around billionaires and control. And so last year, the Competition and Markets Authority stopped 0 mergers in this country. Why? Because Rachel Reeves is saying what we need to do is we need to get out of the way and let growth happen. Well, growth doesn't happen when you just let the biggest companies control everything. And so there's kind of an imbalance between the deference to what we call bad populism and the sort of appeal of what we think is a democracy that's supporting good populism.
So what could we do? What could individuals do to sort of sort of champion some of these corporate scandals and or bring them to the fore? And I mean, can you? So I guess another question: can you spot, given all of your analysis, can you spot a scandal before it appears? And are there ways in which the media or people can use these scandals to effectively put pressure on governments in power to try and change their ways for the better?
So I think that the role of the individual is hard because the role of the individual is to be ready. And I've given this talk for a political audience back in late November, and those were people who I thought were in a potential position of regulatory power. And their job, I said, is to, when the scandals come, seize on them, because that's your moment. And if you don't seize on them, the moments don't come every day. And so from the sort of position of the citizen, who's not necessarily in force in a position of power to be able to do that, it's much more about paying attention when scandals happen and using normal forms of accountability such that politicians perceive people are upset about this. But so the question is, do we have scandals on the horizon? Of course we do. I think the
are you going to call them?
So if I could call market bubbles, Tim, I would be my background would be the Bahamas or something like that, right, from my yacht. But it's pretty clear that we're in some sort of AI bubble, and even the people like Sam Altman, the head of OpenAI, are saying that. And when the AI bubble crashes, I think that there's going to be a lot more attention to the very tight interlinking that all of the largest companies, the Amazons, the Googles, the Microsofts, have made with the new companies of the AI sector, and based on wildly optimistic views about what the potential growth is going to be and the ability to actually turn that growth into revenue for these companies, which they have not demonstrated at all. And so that kind of close interlinking of companies, which is essentially a monopoly behavior, is something that could come under a lot more scrutiny. So more could be said also about the crypto sector, particularly in the United States, where I think, I think scandals are happening right in front of us, and we because they're so political and tied up with the current administration in the United States, they don't yet get seized on because they're in the political sphere. But I think we've got a crypto crash coming, and that may highlight also some more general problems that it seems like a real problem of the sector as opposed to just a partisan left or right problem.
Okay, so you sort of talked about this being quite a long project, and I was wondering that as you were writing the book and all the research that came before that, were you surprised by anything, or have the way you think about democracy in the world itself, has anything changed during that time?
So I think scientists do their work, and this includes social scientists, and their concerns change over time. And I think that it's not true to say that our concerns don't influence the science that we do, right? So if you think about the structure of scientific revolutions, we know that we're kind of prisoners of a given set of assumptions, and sometimes things have to happen to break those assumptions. It's not just that we immediately find evidence and say, "Oh, we'll discount that." So I guess and indeed, Max Planck, I think, said that science proceeds one funeral at a time, right? Because we have to get new people in to think new things. And so I spent a lot of my early career looking at why business always dominates in politics, and the structural forces. But the thing that I discovered was it is in moments that are unusual, that are non-structural, that we get the really big changes. And so what I tried to do then was working with Teku, thinking about how it is that these moments happen, especially as we get what was first the financial crisis, and then the sovereign debt crisis in Europe, because I was living in Italy, where we see people so visibly angry about the role of these big companies. And so I think that I became more concerned about the state of democracy vis-a-vis large companies was changing. The character of democratic capitalism was changing. It was changing because of radical improvements that had happened in companies and made them able to do amazing things, but that also had concentrated amazing power and sort of was making people desert some of their democratic commitments. And I think this became more important to me as something that needs to be worked on, and therefore I started focusing my attention on how we get these moments.
And then we're running out of time, so just probably one last question. You've written the book with, as you mentioned, your collaborator, Teku Lee. Did you agree on everything?
Mean question, Tim.
What a great question. So Teku and I profoundly disagree about many things, and I think the thing that's most relevant probably for this podcast is we kind of disagree about how to do social science, or at least we did when we started. Teku is very much what we call a political behaviorist, where he looks at the individuals and individual opinion, and he's happy with when he gets a new data set so he can figure out how voters changed in this particular election in response to these particular forces. Whereas I was concerned, as what we call a political economist, with the forces that lead to different outcomes and how interest groups win. And I thought elections were nothing but sideshows, and I continue to think that largely. But I think both of us came together agreeing that the democratic public is important, but indifferent to a lot of things. And so the question became, when does it agree? But often he would say something in my office, and I would look at him and have to translate his political behaviorist language into my political economist language. And that continues to happen. We have weekly Zoom calls, and it's not unknown for us to use spicy language talking about behaviorists or political economists and each other's foolish assumptions. But we've each learned, I think, an enormous amount from doing that. And so I think we have not converged, but we've come a lot closer to each other. That's sort of the biggest area of disagreement that we have.
Well, I think it's worked, and I'd encourage our listeners to buy a copy and read the book. So, Billionaire Backlash: The Age of Corporate Scandals. It's hard to read back to front, and How It Can Save Democracy. And so, by Pepper Culpepper and Teku Lee, and it's published by
Bloomsbury,
and it's out now. So, and thank you very much for joining us, Pepper. It's been fascinating to talk to you. I think we should have to get more social scientists on, Syma. They actually, turns out they do statistics and stuff.
Yeah, who would have thought it?
Well, what these things move very slowly, changing hard scientists' mind. I hope we've had a little impact there. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pepper.
Well, there you go. Some social science, Syma.
Yeah, I mean, that was really interesting. I mean, social science, but the science was definitely there, right?
No, I know. It's the way they go out and collect data, interview people, doing various questionnaires, make sure it is as broad as possible in terms of the demographics, and then analyzing them using some pretty hardcore statistical approaches. So you'll probably have to stop being rude about social scientists from now on then.
For our listeners, it's Tim that's rude about social science. No, I'm kidding. No, but also the controls, they clearly do sort of positive and negative controls. And it's, I found it fascinating, and I have to admit, a little bit scary too.
Well, I think what really, you look at things like Meta, you look at things like Google, you look at companies like, SpaceX and Tesla, these huge companies, and I kind of always just thought, and they talk about this early on in the book, that this is a new phenomenon, but no, it's been there, as you say. The East India Company is a really good example, and And they, many of them do eventually just seem to, whether it's they get so big and there's just one or two dodgy employees or whatever, or then you start to see some things go wrong. So like the VW, Volkswagen, not being quite as environmentally friendly as they were supposed to be with their exhaust emissions. And VW is like, I always thought that, well, I suspect that was a German company he was talking about, to be an upstanding, trustworthy company. But even the Germans, they get embroiled in corporate scandals.
Yeah, indeed. And I imagine, sort of dig into things, and it'll be a global phenomenon. It'll be everywhere, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's I guess what we didn't touch on directly, which is kind of interesting also, is the role of the media. And
No, I mean, I think you wonder how many scandals are out there that just don't get much traction.
that's right.
And some of the ones that that he was talking about, the milk scandals in China and in France, for example, the meat scandal, that's kind of relating to human health. And to some extent, of course, things like Meta are, because of all the mental health concerns around people spending a lot of time on social media, and the fear of missing out and whatever, FOMO. So I and also even the kind of admissions on Volkswagen, it was kind of bad for the environment. So I mean, one of the things we didn't talk about is that are the particular types of scandal or impacts that are more likely to catch media attention, and then lead to more and more people becoming actually outraged about it.
And perhaps different types of scandal in different parts of the world, depending on, sort of economic status, the dominant religion, all sorts of things, I would imagine.
You think if there was one in Oxford, it would be the Great Port Scandal, do you?
That's right, the great port and cheese scandal.
Yeah.
I'd be at the heart of it.
Anyway, no, it's fascinating, and I encourage readers to read the book and learn a lot more. Billionaire Backlash by Pepper Culpepper and Taeku Lee, and we'll catch up again soon, Syma. I think we've got a few exciting guests to come over the coming weeks.
Yeah, let's not give too much away right now, and we'll let people know soon.
Excellent. Okay, well, have a good rest of the day.
You too, Tim.
Yeah, bye now.